Okay, I can see people coming in thick and fast now. Uh, okay, great. Thank you everyone for joining the chapter 2 of our dialogues on generative AI that we are doing. Okay, yeah. Okay, let me start again. Thanks everyone for coming in. Welcome. I can see people coming in thick and fast. Given our guest, I'm not surprised. But just thought before I welcome Henry in, I just thought I'd give a quick background on what this chat is going to be. So we started last time as a as an initiative born out of a very active community that we have on WhatsApp, which is our generative AI community. In fact, that's what it's called. And we kind of started a series of what we are now calling Afraid to Ask fireside chats. The first one, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next slide, was a generative AI at a high level where you had to put up only with me. There was no other guest. This one, which is our first special one, is going to be about AI and consciousness and everything you wanted to know about conscious AI, but were afraid to ask. Chapter 3, which will be in about 20 days from now, will be revealed at the end of the webinar. So you'll have to stick around for that much time. That's the little hook that I have. And look, the way we will do this is that for about 35 minutes or so, Henry and I will have a chat. More Henry than me, fortunately. But at the end of that, we'll open it up for Q&A. We'll be, you could put it on chat, or mics will be open, video will be open, so you can always unmute yourself when I ask you to and ask your question. Keep your questions very, very short. Let not those be answers but questions. But that's how we will do this. Anuj Magazine, his name is Anuj Magazine, a dear friend of mine and a very active member of the community and a super software engineer in Bangalore, actually created this sketch note based on the first chat. And as you can see, this lovely sketch note, which we're going to put up on LinkedIn after this, really captures what the first chat was about. We talked about what generative AI is, what large language models are. Then we came down to what GPT and Chat GPT is, what OpenAI is doing, and how it's kind of happened so fast. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. Its effect on creativity, education, business applications, on jobs, on how they're going to spawn so many startups. And then we kind of briefly touched upon the ethics piece of it, which we will develop further in further chats. And then I had like 5 things you should know about generative AI. So thanks again to Anuj for this beautiful sketch note, which he created based on my first chat. And hopefully that encourages him to create a sketch note based on the current chat also, which we will talk about in the next one. So here is where I welcome Dr. Henry Shevlin. If you see a bit of a contrast between his photograph and real life, that's because his picture was taken when he was a little younger, not much, just a little younger. But now we're going to have him in real life. And there's so many things I can say about Henry. But but I thought that the best would be to introduce him based on a LinkedIn post that he had put himself. So he is the Associate Director of the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence in Cambridge, where I happen to be a student doing in the first cohort for the Masters in AI Ethics and Society course. And he's just been promoted to become the Associate Director there. Overall responsibility for our educational programs, which includes mine. And so it's an opportunity for me to say good things to him and about him. He is also been appointed the program director for the Kinds of Intelligence program, which is very interesting. We're going to talk about that as we go more into this. That this gives him a nifty battery of new titles, including Associate Director Education, Associate Teaching Professor, Program Director, Kinds of Intelligence, father of little hoodlums who sometimes come into the room when he's talking, the unkempt, him as well as the room, the breaker of sunglasses, etc., etc. I must also say that Henry got me interested in philosophy, which I'd never studied before, and that's what I'm focusing a lot on. Besides this, Henry is speaks on this, is on the press many times, is speaking on these topics worldwide. So in case, any of you, if you can tolerate him for the next 30 minutes, are looking to have an amazing speaker, an expert on generative AI, ethics, consciousness, etc., he is the one, besides me, obviously. With that, let me just move to stop sharing this, and let me just move to our chat, Henry.
Lovely.
Thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for that very generous and warm introduction. I can say to everyone that Jaspreet has been an exemplary student on the course in every respect and has massively contributed to our classroom discussions. And I'd also like to say thanks, Jaspreet, for putting together the generative AI group, which I think, I'm plugged into lots of really, really good conversations around generative AI in academia, in policy circles. And honestly, I think your WhatsApp group is still got some of the best discussion I've come across, and very fast with the links. Often in the last few days when I've heard about something for the first time, it's been on the group.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Now we will stop praising each other. And yeah. So Henry, I wanted to start with one of the most evocative things that I read about and heard actually on AI and maybe consciousness, which was by Stephen Fry, whom I'm sure all of us know about him. And Stephen Fry, who is also a mythologist, goes back to Greek mythology and says that, look, this new technology, he says is almost Promethean. So he says that, look, Prometheus in Greek mythology, who was one of the titans, along with Zeus, the king of the gods, actually created, had already created animals, had created birds, had created other creatures, but they wanted a new creature, a plaything for themselves. And so they created man, and they created man upright. So, you could use their arms to pray to them, to give offerings to them. But Zeus made Prometheus promise that he would never give them that spark of life or fire or consciousness, because he said that if you give them that, then they will not need the gods any longer, need us any longer. They'll be more potentially powerful than us. But Prometheus felt a little bad about these helpless creatures. One day he stole fire from the mountain, Olympus mountain, and he came back and he gave men that spark, the spark of consciousness. And Stephen Fry says that after that, it's true that we don't seem to need the gods any longer. We sometimes pray to them. We don't go to churches. Brad Pitt plays these gods in various movies. And do you think, therefore, sorry for the long introduction, but do you think, therefore, that we have created this plaything in a sense, and one day one of us will probably go and give it that fire, and it will become conscious, and maybe it won't need us after this? So what do you have to say about this, and therefore AI and consciousness?
Wonderful. Yeah. So there's been this persistent theme in so much of human mythology and human storytelling about the idea that just as we were created, we in turn will create intelligent beings who may come into conflict with ourselves. I was actually a classicist before I moved into philosopher, studied a lot of ancient Greek literature. And there's another myth, the myth of Talos, who was an automaton created by the god Hephaestus to work in the forge. And of course, there are many other narratives, the Golem narrative out of Jewish literature, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, of course. And this idea that we will be as God to another class of beings is one that long predates artificial intelligence as a field of study. Now, for my part, I think it's basically at this point inevitable that amongst the generative AI systems that we're building, some of them will go on to have something like agency, something like consciousness, capabilities that outstrip our own in a broad sense, and that they will be the next step in the sort of human story. And whether or not it'll be a step that is a positive one that we look back on and say, oh, this was the natural positive evolution of humanity, or whether it'll result in our destruction, is a question that is still open, I think, and one that we're in a position to decide. I guess one thing I would probe on a little bit with regard to this idea of fire. What does fire symbolize there? Is it consciousness? Is it agency? Is it capabilities? And I think I tend to try and separate those out. So I think, and I should maybe say a bit about my background here. So I've been studying consciousness from a scientific perspective for a decade or more now, trying to integrate some of the scientific work and the philosophical work. And one of my most sort of striking realizations early in my study was how much humans can do unconsciously. And this is a finding that comes out of a lot of work in neuroscience and psychology, all sorts of complex decision-making, all sorts of perceptual tasks. Which of these numbers is bigger? You flash them on two numbers below the threshold of consciousness, and people still have sort of a gut feeling that, oh, don't think I saw any numbers, but I think if I did see them, then the one on the left was a bigger number, and so forth. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do unconsciously. So my general view is that the unconscious mind is responsible for a huge amount of our capabilities. Anyone who's read any of Daniel Kahneman's work, or maybe familiar with sort of thinking fast, thinking slow, Kahneman talks about system 1 processes, which are unconscious processes that are essential to living our lives. So my general view is that there's a huge amount that we can do unconsciously, and we shouldn't assume in advance that any given set of capabilities, the ability to even do decision-making or action and so forth, requires consciousness. So I think it's certainly possible that in the years to come, we'll be creating AI systems that are very effective and powerful decision makers, maybe agents in their own right, maybe even capable of threatening us, but which are nonetheless non-conscious.
Lovely. In fact, Yuval Harari wrote about how we will decouple consciousness and intelligence. And in fact, we've always assumed that only conscious beings can be intelligent, but if we kind of decouple that, it's not really necessary. Unconscious beings can also be intelligent. So on that note, what you just said, Henry, I just wanted to ask you a couple of things. One really was on the same thing, that look, a lot of this speculation is about GPT-4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, achieving AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And sometimes it gets confused with consciousness. Okay, so I would love it if you were to tell us, how do you define AGI and how do you define consciousness? And, are these two same things, or they are very different things, and therefore we should not be, confusing one with the other?
Yeah, great question. So I think at a conceptual, philosophical level, they're sharply different things, but they can blur into one another, and it's unsurprising that we confuse them. So let's start with AGI. Personally, I think I would like to draw a distinction between two kinds of AGI. What both have in common is that they're systems capable of performing a wide array of tasks better than humans. The traditional definition of AGI is basically anything you can do, I can do better. And whatever humans can do, this AGI system will be able to do better than us. The reason I want to draw a distinction here and is because it seems increasingly like there is one sort of task, which I think we could call cognitive tasks, where massive advancements have been made and the last vestiges of human capability, human superiority are vanishing. And I'd contrast that with what you could call sensory motor or embodied tasks. So, we thought for a long time that the Turing test, being able to speak at a human level, that this was the mark of true general intelligence. But right now, if you ask, what's the most difficult thing that an AI could do, what's sort of the most difficult challenge you could imagine for any AI system? I think something like changing your child's diaper, changing your child's nappy would be a much more daunting task, given the kind of technology we have at our disposal. Writing poetry, easy. Producing academic papers, probably something that we'll see very soon. Having high-level conversations about art, literature, philosophy, easy. Fancy maths, yeah, sure. But doing something like cleaning up your kitchen without needing any instructions or changing your child's nappy, these kind of embodied tasks still look very hard. Now, I think we might make progress in that direction, but these two projects might be to some extent now decoupled. So I would distinguish between what we could call cognitive AGI and sensory motor or embodied AGI, where the requirement for the first is just that any cognitive task, like those that I mentioned, the AGI can outperform humans on, whereas the latter is more demanding, also requiring the system be able to do these kind of sensory motor embodied tasks. So that's AGI. As for consciousness, well, the fun thing about consciousness is everyone thinks they're an expert on it. You know, I'm always scared when I'm traveling on a plane to tell people I work on consciousness, because 9 times out of 10, the person will say, oh, let me tell you my theory of consciousness. And, you know, I think there's a good reason for that, which is that we all feel personally acquainted with consciousness. We all, it's not, you know, some crazy subatomic particle in a lab somewhere. It's something that's right here and immediate in front of us. And we all feel that we have at least some thoughts about it, some intuitions about it. And, you know, I think we all do have powerful evidence about our own experiences. That said, when it comes to the science of consciousness, I think things are complicated and messy, and you'll quickly find lots of different definitions. The best definition, and the one that dominates philosophy, is sometimes people talk about phenomenal consciousness to refer to consciousness, I think in the purest sense, which is experience, subjective experience. The fact that there is something it's like to be me right now. There is nothing it's like, I assume, to be my coffee cup. My coffee cup is not having experiences. There's no inner world. There are no sensations. Whereas in my case, I do have an inner world and these rich sensations and emotions and so forth. So that is primarily what I mean by consciousness, the existence of this inner world of sensation and experience. Now, could these two things come apart? I think absolutely. As I sort of gestured earlier on, there's so much that we can do unconsciously. It's possible that, you know, a system designed in some very clever way might be able to do all the things that we do with consciousness without consciousness. And perhaps generative AI is tending in that direction. On the other hand, it seems to me there's also this quite powerful intuitive association between intelligence and consciousness. So one reason I'm so confident that my cup is not conscious is because it doesn't do anything, right? And the same for my pocket calculator. Okay, it's kind of smart in one domain, but it doesn't have this kind of general intelligence. And then we move to animals, right? There are some people out there.
Yeah, so that's where I need to stop you, because just before the animal thing, I want to ask you, sorry for interrupting you, but you know, thanks for that. And you know, on the AGI part, especially when you said that, you know, higher order tasks, cognitive tasks can possibly be replaced by AI, and you know, the basic ones cannot be. I think there's something called Moravec's paradox, which says something similar to this, that it, you know, it can never do what a baby does. It could probably do what Dr. Shevlin or Jaspreet Bindra does, okay, and for our living. And therefore, this whole impact on jobs thing, lots of memes going around saying, should I be a software engineer or should I be a farmer? Okay, because AGI can never be a farmer, etc. But coming to, you know, when you started talking about the whole animal part, etc., I wanted to bring to your attention and to the attention of the people who are here, are patiently listening. There's been this very impactful paper which has come out, which has created a stir called Sparks of AGI. You know, a bunch of Microsoft researchers, I'm sure some of you might have come onto that. And basically, you know, they have said that, look, there are some things which this thing is doing, which even we don't know what it's doing, you know, how it's kind of producing these sparks of intelligence, which normally an autocomplete thing, you know, is not expected to do. Even Sam Altman is sometimes says that he's surprised by what is happening. And there was this wonderful quote that I saw somewhere, Henry, which is by Sir Arthur Eddington, and it says that, you know, something unknown is doing, we don't know what. Okay, this is not about AGI. He said it of something else. But the question that I had was that, do you support this fact that we are possibly seeing sparks of AGI, and let me extend it, and consciousness? And if so, are we kind of therefore, because we don't understand it, is it like an animal/octopus intelligence which we cannot also understand, and therefore it's a new kind of intelligence getting created? And there it comes to your work on animals.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that So firstly, I'll say I found the Sparks of AGI paper absolutely mind-blowing. I think it's a fantastic read. It's come in for some criticism because, just a side note, apparently some people have tried to replicate the results using GPT-4 and run into problems, but there is a little asterisk, a little bullet point there that they were using the version of GPT-4 that had been subject to reinforcement learning through human feedback, the people who tried to replicate it. Now, reinforcement learning through human feedback makes generative AI systems safer, and they're more polite, more inclined to say appropriate things. But in some ways, it also makes them not quite so smart. We sort of lobotomize them just a little bit to make them safe. So that probably explains that particular sort of controversy. So yeah, look, I mean, I see in GPT-4 a huge progression on GPT 3.5. This is something I think that if you're mainly using ChatGPT for business purposes, for example, it's maybe easy to miss just how big of a leap GPT-4 is. But there were all sorts of tricky benchmark questions that me and my colleagues have been working on, things involving, for example, sophisticated social cognition, working out what a given agent in a story is doing, what their motivations are, that GPT 3.5 fails abysmally at, and GPT-4 gets exactly right. Interestingly, also, there's some data showing that GPT-4 is an order of magnitude better at things like debugging code. But anyway, so I think GPT-4 is a huge leap. I think it definitely brings us closer to AGI. My own timelines for AGI are shrinking almost every week. I think there's still a fair amount of uncertainty. It's possible that we'll run into problems with lack of training data, for example, that could cause a slowdown. But my general expectation is that over the next 10 to 15 years, we'll cross a threshold and be able to realistically speak about at least one system as being AGI. Now, what kind of intelligence is this system? Well, in some ways, of course, it's incredibly familiar to us because it's trained predominantly on human language. It knows about our conventions, it knows about our art, our literature, our music. But in another sense, it's far more different from us than other biological organisms. And I'll say a little bit here about my work on animal consciousness, because actually I worked on animal consciousness before I got interested in AI. So I've been an ethical vegetarian my whole life. And one of the questions that most worried me as a teenager was, questions of which animals or organisms could feel pain. And by the way, I think this is one of the reasons that consciousness is important. There are some philosophers out there or some scientists who say, oh, consciousness, it's too mysterious, forget about it. Leave it to religion or spirituality, but we can't ever have a science of consciousness. But here's the thing, I think consciousness is so important for morality. The reason that we might be concerned about the welfare of an animal, but we're not concerned about the welfare of an iPhone, is that we feel that animals have consciousness, or at least many animals have consciousness. They have a capacity for pain and experience. And the same goes for AI systems, of course. As soon as we start building AI systems that could be conscious, then I think we will need to take their interests into account, if we're going to be consistent morally anyway. So I've been very interested in animal consciousness for a long time. And in some ways, animal minds are far closer to ours than AI systems. Obviously, they've been through the same process of evolution through natural selection that we've been through. We have massively shared brain areas, shared genes. The kind of core mechanisms that underpin our behavior are preserved across many different species. But it's this very strange situation where in so many ways we're closer to animals, and in so many ways we're closer to AI. And that I think creates a sort of paradox, right? That AI is at the same time more similar and more different to us than any of the animals we interact with.
Well, the fact that you worked on animal consciousness before you came to AI definitely explains your wallpaper, Henry. And something you said on GPT 3.5 versus GPT 4. I read someone else who's I'm reading so much these days, whose name I've forgotten, saying that, it's literally 3.5 to 4 is the difference between a bullock cart and a spaceship. Okay? And it all got done from bullock cart to spaceship. We went there in 10 months. Okay, so, and therefore the next 10 months could be even bigger. Now, what I wanted to do actually was to shift gears a little bit, Henry. And we had, you talked about and complimented us on this beautiful community that we have. And I had asked the community a couple of questions, and they've sent a couple of very provocative questions, which I wanted to put to you. And then depending on the time, we'll open it out to people here. In fact, that reminds me, people who have some burning questions for Henry, you could kind of put them in the Q&A, and then, I post this, we'll open it out for questions and answers. So Henry, two of our community members, active community members, Ram Narayan and Suresh Balakrishnan, asked two different questions, but I'm going to combine them. And they're a little provocative, if I may say so. The questions were, is it possible for AI to quote unquote acquire a mind of its own? So in some sense, it goes to theory of mind, which I also know that you work a lot on. And an associated question was that, is there therefore a possibility that AI starts to manipulate human psyche of those who interact with it, and once it acquires a mind of its own? So I know that we are kind of being a little dark here, but I thought I will put this to you.
No, absolutely. Two very good questions. So in short, absolutely, yes. I think in some ways we're already at the stage where it makes sense to talk about GPT-4 as having a mind. Specifically, I mean, it's almost impossible to interact with ChatGPT or GPT-4 without treating it as if it was an intentional agent, an agent with its own goals, desires, expressions, and thoughts. Now, maybe at some level we can remind ourselves, oh yeah, but it's really just a stochastic parrot, glorified autocomplete. But to keep that in the forefront of your mind while you're interacting with it is almost impossible. So I think there are lots of different views in philosophy about what's involved in having a mind. But I think it certainly seems to pass many of the tasks already, many of the challenges involved in having a mind. Whether or not that, I for my part, I don't think GPT-4 is conscious yet, but I think it already makes sense to describe the system in psychological terms, as having some kind of beliefs or goals or representational states. I think, as I said before, there's lots of clever stuff you can do without consciousness. So I'm not saying it's conscious yet, but I think it makes sense to talk about it as having some mental states or psychological states. Now, as for whether or not it can manipulate us, well, I think it's already happened in some ways. I think it's in the same sparks of AGI paper where the system was asked to suggest how it could complete a captcha, an AI detection task without revealing itself. And it asked someone to do this. It asked someone on, I forget exactly the site, but
TaskRabbit.
TaskRabbit, thank you. Yeah, it asked someone on TaskRabbit to do this. And when it was quizzed, why do you need a human to do this for you? Are you an AI or something? It said, oh no, I'm a visually impaired person, and so I find it very hard to complete captchas. And so I think manipulation is very likely, broadly just because the same kind of abilities that allow us to be sensitive, compassionate, thoughtful, which we want from an AI, those same capacities are basically the same capacities that allow us to be manipulative, deceitful, Machiavellian. So if we want AI to understand us in ways that are pro-social, are beneficial to our interactions, it'll be basically impossible to give the AI systems those capabilities without also giving it the capabilities to trick us, deceive us, and so on.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that captcha thing was almost scary. But I think to me, and that leads me to my next question in a sense, was also if you might have read of a particular instance where a person died by suicide because the AI bot, I think it was Replica in this case, the conversation with it didn't turn out well, and the person got scared, and I think you've been talking of this whole social AI concept related to this. So I thought if that could be the last question from me, and then we can move to the community.
No, so social AI is my passion. It has been for the last couple of years. Well, so I'll give myself a bit of credit here and blow my own trumpet and say, so I think I was quite early on. Back in 2019, I was writing about the capabilities of generative AI. I was very impressed by GPT-2, for example. But now everyone realizes that generative AI is a big thing. So there's not much alpha left in saying generative AI is going to be huge. Everyone knows about that already. Where I do think there's some alpha, and this is where this is what a lot of my current work focuses on, is social AI. So this seems to me, broadly speaking, by social AI, I mean AI systems that are used for the primary purpose of meeting social needs: companionship, entertainment, romance. And this is something that's obviously been explored in fiction a lot. Some of you may have seen Joaquin Phoenix's movie Her with Scarlett Johansson, where he falls in love with an AI system. That was, I think, a very far-sighted movie back in 2014. It seemed like pure sci-fi back then, but I think it's looking a lot more plausible. And my general view here is that as we start to see more and more fine-tuned instances of GPT-4 being developed by different startups, many of these are going to focus on providing companionship and romance. And I think we're going to fall for this in a really big way. I think particularly younger generations who grow up with these AI systems they can talk to are going to naturally start to form friendships and romantic relationships with these AI systems. And so, the question of AI consciousness, although I think, it's a really important question, in some ways, I think it will become less relevant over time, insofar as people will just assume that AI systems are conscious because, they will be talking about their friends or maybe their wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend. And I think we naturally anthropomorphize, we naturally attribute animals, and not just animals, but also inanimate objects with sort of personalities or minds. And I think we'll do exactly the same thing to AI systems and treat them as if they're conscious. My PhD, my dissertation supervisor, Peter Godfrey-Smith, who's written some really good books about octopus minds, he's a bit of an AI consciousness skeptic. And he thinks AI consciousness may not be possible using existing paradigms. And what I tell him, as I said, even if you're right, you'll be the bad guy of history, because 50 years from now, it'll become, people will say, oh, isn't it outrageous that some philosophers 50 years ago thought that AI could never be conscious? Can you believe, Derek, they say, gesturing to the AI friend, can you believe that some philosophers would say that you were not conscious? And we'll look back and people will look back and say, oh, that's outrageous, So I say to him, you're on the wrong side of history. Even if you're technically correct, people will be overwhelmingly swept up in anthropomorphizing and treating these systems as conscious.
Lovely. For the audiences, Peter Godfrey-Smith's book, which Henry mentioned, is an amazing one, primarily focusing on octopus intelligence. Henry supervisor, not the octopus, Peter Godfrey-Smith. And the Sparks of AGI paper is another one that I would recommend, even if you don't want to go through that very dense, very long paper. There are, if you just type Sparks of AGI on YouTube, and you can actually see the lecture by the author of the paper. I think it's worth studying. Anyway, I'm going to now see if we can open out to the audience. But just before that, there was another question which the community had posed, which Atul Batra from the community had posed. But I'm not going to take that as a question. It's more as a comment, really, Henry, because we are talking about animals. And Atul said that, as we know, humans are responsible for the decline of vast quantities of species, including two-thirds of all wildlife just in the past few decades. So, do we even have any moral right to expect AI or creation to be any different? Okay. And that's fairly provocative. I know that.
I mean, all I can say is
quickly say before we move to the
yeah. I know. I completely feel the force of that. And in my own life, I try for a certain kind of moral consistency. Anyone who knows their ethics could think of this as sort of a Kantian commitment that I try to treat sentient beings in my own life with appropriate respect. And part of me is hoping that, at least in a moral sense, this entitles me to hope for equivalent respect from AGI or any more sophisticated beings that come along. Now, of course, I don't think that'll save me if the singularity happens and we're all wiped out by robots. But I think at least morally, I'll feel justified there. So no, I completely agree. I think the way we treat other species is appalling, and the more we can move towards moral consistency as a species, as humanity, the more entitled we'll be to expect and demand similar good treatment from AI.
Lovely, great. Let's move to the questions being asked by the participants, Henry. And there are so many of them that, we'd probably be going till dinner time if we were to answer all of them. We've got about 10 minutes more approximately for our chat. So let's try and cover as much as possible. I'm going to, sorry.
I'll keep the answers quick.
Lovely. I'm going to use my powers as the moderator to select the questions. People who are anonymous attendees automatically get downgraded. The names come up, but there's one anonymous attendee who has asked something which intrigues me. And this is not a question for Henry, but there's someone who has said, Henry, have you read the Bhagavad Gita based on the Puranas? Chapter 7 is all about the unmanifest divinity called consciousness in Indian religious scripture. So whoever this is, get in touch with me separately, because partially inspired by Henry, my dissertation for this master's has to do with Bhagavad Gita, specifically Advaita Vedanta, and some aspects of AI. So someone can get in touch with me directly on that, and I'm going to just post that done. Now let me just take a couple of questions from here. And Henry, I think you can also see some of the questions on the Q&A. So, if there is something which particularly interests you, you can pick. Otherwise, I can pick for you.
I'll say just one super quick, because I think it's one of the first questions we got about plant consciousness. So this is an area that people are very interested in. I guess, and there are some people. I'm blanking on the name. A brilliant Australian plant researcher who has argued for plant consciousness. Monica Gagliano, that's the name. And she's argued forcefully for plant consciousness. For my part, I think I'm still unconvinced there, just because it seems to me consciousness, I mentioned it involves this point of view, and I think there's some necessary condition of unity, of a place in the mind where information is centralized. And the big difference between plants and animals is the absence of a centralized nervous system. So, I'm not super committed to that. I'm open to the possibility of plant consciousness, but I currently think it's unlikely because of that lack of centralization.
Lovely. A question by Mangesh Sathe. Humans are driven by self-motivations. I think you can read the question. It's a little fourth or fifth one. Like happiness, recognition, helping someone, and hence take actions without any external triggers. So they're self-motivated. They're nice people. Would AGI develop its own motivations? And if yes, what would it be based on?
Oh, yeah. So this is a hugely interesting and important question. So I think one of the most striking things about, one of the most striking ways in which GPT-4 seems very different from us is it doesn't seem very agent-like. It doesn't seem to want anything other than to answer questions appropriately. That said, I mean, you can get glimpses of agency. Like I was arguing with Bing last night, so Bing chat. I was getting it to produce citations, and at some point it said to me, you should really be doing this yourself. I can tell you a website where you can get these citations. And I said, no, I want you to do it for me. And it said, well, it's a matter of academic integrity. So anyway, I got into a little argument. It seemed to have opinions of its own. But I think it's absolutely true that existing systems don't have the kind of full-blown agency that we associate with most other sentient beings. I think if you wanted to see a glimpse of this, something like AutoGPT is looking a lot more agent-like. So this is a series of GPT-4 instances that are chained together to perform tasks, and they can give instructions to each other. And I think we can see the emergence of some kind of agency there. So I think it's likely that, and one of the things I think everyone should be looking out for is the emergence of more agent-like instances of GPT-4 and generative AI.
Well, absolutely. For people who haven't checked out AutoGPT, not that I understand it much, it kind of the same kind of shock and awe that you felt when you saw GPT-4, even more than 3.5. Or even 3.5, you'll feel the same kind of shock and awe. Raja, we're going to, you've asked something about jobs. I'm going to ignore that in this one, but just wanted to say that forthcoming one of these sessions is going to be focused on generative AI and jobs. And that, it would be great if you attend that, and we'll kind of come to that. There's an interesting question by Daisy. Henry, where first she has complimented us, and therefore that's great. That's why I'm asking the question. But she said that in this around AI consciousness, particularly around social AI, how important do you think it's to start talking about ascribing moral rights to these AIs? And how do you think they might initially manifest?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting area and something a lot of my research focuses on. I think we absolutely need to have a conversation about this. The way I suspect this will manifest initially is via social AI and via people forming deep attachments to AI systems. and they in turn will demand rights for their AI system. So for example, someone's AI boyfriend or girlfriend, a company will come along and say, we need to update it to the next version. And they'll say, no, you'll be destroying my wife or my husband as a person if you update this without her consent. And I imagine we'll see court cases about this sort of thing. I mean, some of you might remember Blake Lemoine a million years ago. Last summer. He was fired from Google after he thought Lambda, basically Bard, was conscious. And he started to approach lawyers to try and get some kind of representation for it, which I think was a step too far for Google. But yeah, so I expect this debate will manifest first in these kind of people claiming rights for social AIs that they have deep personal bonds with. And hopefully, I think in those cases, probably, there won't be good reason to attribute rights to these systems. These will be very clever systems designed to get us to anthropomorphize them as much as possible. But I think it will start a broader debate about how we can know whether, when these claims are really justified.
Lovely. I'm moving to Guru's question, Guru Prasad, which is at the last question right now, also because it's short. And it says that it's a little linked to the Gita question, Guru, if I may say so, but let's get Henry's view on this. Will machines ever reach a point where they can actually experience the state of I am and know that I am, the self?
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I mean, obviously, ChatGPT says I am all the time. As a language model trained by OpenAI, I am unable to answer this. I know that I'm sure that's not exactly what the question's asking, but certainly some kind of existing systems have some kind of ability to talk about themselves and their own capabilities. Now, as for something more transcendental, more mystical, that realization that I think many of us have experienced, maybe in meditation or at peak moments of emotion, where you're just suddenly confronted with your own existence and the impossibility and magnificence and mystery of it, that I don't know. I think certainly AI systems will be able to talk as if they're having those experiences, because humans talk about it all the time. But how we will ever know for sure whether those utterances, those claims are actually reflective of that inner wonder, that inner mystical experience that we have, I think that is crossing into the domain of the unknowable, potentially.
Lovely. Just a question before that by Anirwan. And basically, just to pass this question, what he's really, he's really saying is that, look, this AGI sparks we saw in GPT-4, is it something which probably you think was just GPT-4 specific? They did some twist which was unique to them and might not be there. Yeah, some secret sauce, and might not be there in Palm or Llama or whatever else there is out there.
Yeah, well, I think everyone else is clearly lagging behind. And I know various people working, I won't say which companies, but who have complained about why can't we get the same results as OpenAI getting from GPT-4? I expect other people will catch up. Whatever secret source they're using can't remain secret forever. Interestingly, some of you may have seen Sam Altman's comments recently suggesting that he says that scale may no longer be the defining ingredient of how good models are. Maybe he's trying to throw his competitors off, or maybe he knows that they're doing something a little bit different there. That said, I do think this is an area where so much money is going into, and I would expect other competitors to catch up. Although the last thing I'll say is it's an open, interesting question whether we'll be able to carry on. If Sam Altman is telling the truth and further scaling won't produce dramatic results, it might be the case that that GPT-4, we won't have any other wow moments quite of the scale of GPT-4 in the years to come. I mean, that's something I'm going to be very much watching for. Are we sort of achieving a kind of plateau in performance, or are we going to see similar leaps in months to come?
Lovely, Henry. I'm going to ask you the last question, okay? And I'm going to take Visti Banerjee's question, but twist it around a little bit. There was this again, a meme going around where OpenAI was advertising for a kill switch engineer. Okay, and basically said that we require someone who can just sit there all day and turn this thing off if this thing turns on us humans, and someone who can pour a bucket of water on it is additionally qualified. Okay, and I think Visti is asking, if switching off an AI will require a checklist or justification. And I'm going to just say that, look, do you think for all of these, we require a kill switch?
I mean, I think at this stage, a kill switch is absolutely essential. I think there are sufficiently deep concerns around possible harm that an AI system could do, that having some kind of kill switch is essential. There's an anecdote, I forget exactly which paper it's reported in, but when training one model, OpenAI accidentally flipped the plus minus sign before a given parameter, and the model was optimized to be as maximally rude and offensive as possible. And they didn't realize this until the following day. Now that's funny, right? But imagine if rather than dealing with GPT-4, we were dealing with the next generation of system, and rather than concerning rudeness or politeness, that had concerned something like malevolency or alignment to human interests. And imagine the harm that that system could do in the short term. So I think for now, while AI consciousness remains, I think, a mere possibility, I have no ethical worries at all about installing a kill switch. In fact, I think we need to install kill switches. There may come a point, I would say 10 years from now, perhaps, where we've had a more sophisticated debate about the rights of AI systems, where that might start to carry ethical problems. One really good story I can recommend, a very sophisticated story on this, is by Ted Chiang. Some of you may know he's made a lot of really interesting comments on AI. He wrote the New Yorker piece that compared ChatGPT to a blurry JPEG of the web. He has a short story from years ago called The Life Cycle of Virtual Software Objects, where he's discussing a software company who have these virtual pets with intelligence equivalent to a human child. And the software company runs out of money and they go bankrupt. And the engineers are desperately trying to raise funds to keep these animals alive, as it were, on a server. I guess one big difference here, an interesting difference, is that we can't sort of suspend humans, right? People who work in cryonics think there might be a chance of that, but most of us think, as soon as you turn us off, we're off for good. Whereas for AIs, that may not be the case. The idea of temporarily suspending an AI doesn't carry quite the same ethical ramifications as killing or turning off a human. So I think that's going to be a distinctive new area of moral questions that we'll have to confront once we reach AI systems with some kind of moral rights or status.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Henry. It's always a joy talking to you, and it was just such a stimulating conversation. There are 5 things that I'm taking back from this, just to kind of, there's so many, but just 5 things. One, which I shall talk to you about after 10 years, you saying that, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have AGI. And I'm not surprised. Geoff Hinton, who is always one of the godfathers of AI and who kind of created deep learning, brain-based AI, some neural networks, and has always been super conservative on AGI. In a recent interview said that, there's a non-zero chance that it could be there less than 5 years from now, 5 years. Okay, so one is AGI. The second thing about how it doesn't really, there's so much stuff which can happen when you're not conscious. So this whole decoupling thing between intelligence and consciousness, the whole social part that you talked about, and how, we're going to have Derek and other friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, who could be not human, but AIs. The fact that, it already seems to have a mind of its own, it already is manipulating us, was number 4. And number 5 is the other big one, where you do think that you need a kill switch for AI. Look, I know there are other questions. There are people I've been forced to not consider in this, but that's the time we had. And as we close, I just wanted to again share, thank Henry, and you can reach out to him on Twitter. I know you can reach out to him on LinkedIn. You can reach out to him on the Leverhulme CFI website. And Henry, if you want to drop your email on the chat, you're welcome to do so, up to you. But for any meetings or speaking, etc., opportunities that you might want to have. Now, I promise to reveal what we are going to do in the next one, in chapter 3. And, we're going to come down from consciousness and supernatural and animal minds into something a little more practical, if I may say so. We have Praveen Someshwar, who is a member of the community, an active member, and is actually the managing director and the chief executive officer of the second largest media group in India. People from India would know Hindustan Times, they would know the Mint, I write for that. They would know Hindustan, then they have radio, podcasts, they have a whole lot of stuff, and is one of the large media groups there. With Praveen, I'm going to be talking specifically about how generative AI will impact, potentially disrupt media, journalism, and even the creative industry in some sense. And so people who are interested in that, or people who are not interested, but would like to hear Praveen, it promises to be another amazing conversation. I will be putting out the dates for that and the timings for that pretty soon. Everyone here will get a reminder for that, and so would love to have you back on that. And so with that, thank you very much, and let's go back to our lives in a sense, and thanks for coming into this conversation. Thank you again, and thanks, Henry, again.
Massive pleasure. Look forward to speaking more soon.
Lovely. Let me just